Welcome, everybody out there. Welcome to the Law, Your Money, and You. I am Roberta Sapphire, an attorney in Sharon, Massachusetts.
Hi, and I'm Camille Barron, a healthcare advisor and financial coordinator, also in Sharon, Massachusetts. And Roberta, we have yet another return guest today who is so happy he's here.
But he's more than a return guest. He's laughing. He's whatever he gets involved in is just super successful. And I'll introduce you, David Yas, and tell the people a little bit about yourself before we get to what you're doing now, which is
sure.
Start with the Lawyers Weekly.
Thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure to be on the Law, Your Money, and You, and it's become a habit of mine to go back and look at the old appearances and see how young I used to be, how young we all used to be. But that's
Speak for
good.
yourself.
It's like going through an old scrapbook. So I was born in Sharon, raised in Sharon, and have owned 3 different homes in Sharon. And more recently in my life, I was the town moderator for 6 years. And
you were great.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much, but I thought 6 years was about right. Also, there were other people that wanted to run, and I figured if someone else wants to step in, let's give someone else a turn. And so Andy Nebenzahl has been great after me, so way to go, Andy.
He is good.
And much of my career was spent working with Lawyers Weekly. I'm an attorney by education, like you guys, but I worked at Lawyers Weekly, so was the kind of keeper of that record for about 15 years. Most recently, I'm in the podcast business full time, so it's been a weird, long ride.
Tell us about the podcast business. How did you get into it? What made you decide?
So I've been dabbling in it since I was at Lawyers Weekly. We launched podcasts probably around 2008 was the first one we launched, which was before most people even knew what a podcast was. So that was a challenge explaining to people what it was. Some people still don't know what a podcast is, but I started the Boston Podcast Network about 3 years ago as sort of a side hustle, but it took on some momentum. So, we produce, roughly 36 shows or more, constantly growing. And a lot of professionals want podcasts. A lot of lawyers want podcasts. A lot of consultants and other folks as a way to market and promote their business. And they don't know where to start, a lot of them. So you can try to do a podcast yourself. There's everyone can do it, of course. There's a little bit of a learning curve there. But for, companies, corporations, and professionals that want just us to take care of everything, we can connect with them remotely. They can come in here to the studio. We're delicately getting back into the studio with obeying all the proper COVID precautions. But we produce the whole thing from start to finish, intro music, outro music, and patching in guests and all that fun stuff. And so that's a lot of people want podcasts, happily, knock on wood. So we're busy.
Yeah, especially this last year, we're hearing more and more and more of it. And they're saying, even to Camille and myself, you should do a podcast. You should do a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But how come you have the earphones on? Does that make the voice clearer or something?
The better to hear you, my dear. I'm in the habit of doing everything through my mixing board. And so you're hearing me through my prized possession, she's like my third child, my Rode microphone. We wanted radio quality equipment in the studio. And so I'm just better tapped in always and also I can hear my own voice back through me. So, since people that like to hear themselves talk like me, that's a treat. But really, we recommend it of all of our podcast hosts just because you get in the habit of hearing how your voice sounds and how to modulate, how to make sure you don't take yourself away from the microphone. If you go away from the microphone, then you lose that sound. And so that sort of thing.
David, when I first met you, I thought that you had a voice for radio.
Yes, a TV.
Did you say a face for radio? If I have a voice for radio, how
come?
Yeah. Well, why do you keep having me back on your TV show? I can't do anything about the face. No.
We said the last time we said they were looking for that good-looking guy.
Oh, wow. Now we're talking.
You had said they had you confused with something, but I forget what it was. But
right. Have you had Brad Pitt on the show? Because we often get mistaken for one another. Yeah. No, I mean, I've always loved this stuff. I mean, I've always sort of dabbled in it. I was a DJ in college, and have, guest hosted on radio shows before. So it's hard to break into radio. And so, there was never really a natural avenue for me to do that, being a guy who went to law school and everything. But podcasting is cool because it's kind of the great equalizer. Anyone can do one. It's create your own radio show, really.
Amazing.
Do you ever do, besides the podcast, do you also record it, for YouTube or
well,
TV?
That's a good question. We are, as you can see, we are at least somewhat video friendly here in the studio. And I just had somebody here behind me, with the logo and all the signage behind them. I think you have to be at least a little video friendly these days because everything's done by Zoom. If you hadn't noticed, we're doing it now. And so for our podcast hosts that are going to, even if they're not going to use the video portion of the podcast, they want to present well and present as a professional podcaster. So we offer that. We do video podcasts. Most people will use it as a complement to the audio podcast. Podcasts are still, by and large, completely audio creature. But a lot of people find that it helps them with SEO, search engine friendliness, to have a version of it on YouTube as well as on Apple Podcasts. And so we work with people to do that. There are different ways you can do it. You can just run, if you want, you can just run the audio portion of the podcast and then just run a logo as the video portion of your video. Or you can create, a Zoom video style, something like that. So it's another way to do it, but by and large, podcasting is we're in your ears more than anything else.
And it's much more convenient. You could be listening to it when you're driving. You can do so much more with it where you don't need a screen in front of you.
Well, it's a question too. How do the people listen to it? Do they you on a radio dial, or how do they do that?
No radio for us, Roberta. It's all, podcasting is really like on-demand radio. So the vast majority of people will listen on Apple Podcasts, the Apple Podcast app on their phone, where you can, have your own library of shows. So if there's a show you like, you can subscribe to it. And then each time you open that app, you'll see that show and you'll see all the episodes. So one of the nice things about podcasting is if you hear about a good podcast, you might check in and listen to episode 13 because that's what interests you. And then you can go back and cherry pick, or maybe you like the personalities on the show so much that you'll go and you'll listen to the whole library. They live forever. And much of what we do is sort of evergreen material, meaning it's not necessarily current events. It's just good information. And so people find on Apple Podcasts. There are a bunch of other apps you can find it on. Our clients are on a host of them, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, a whole bunch. We make sure everybody's up and gets the distribution out there. And everything lives on our website too, pod617.com.
Well, which are you on Apple? Or are you on all of these, or how many are there?
Yeah, there are we think 8 major ones, including Stitcher, which is the app that is most commonly used with the Android phone. But like I say, Apple Podcasts is still the big boy. Spotify's coming on a little bit. So, but you can listen on, of course, you can listen on the web. Most of these apps have a web version of them. A lot of people are going to listen on their phone, like Camille pointed out. In the car is a very popular place, or at the gym. And so, it's once we get the podcast out there, we make sure it's on all these platforms. So it's pretty hard to miss. Even with the simple Google search of the name of the podcast, you're probably going to find it.
And are most of the high school kids doing this, or college kids, or you can see more and more companies are doing this?
The industry statistics seem to show that the listenership, it does tilt towards younger people. That's probably obvious, but not as heavily as you might think. There were plenty of people in every generation listening to podcasts.
What age group is younger people? It changes all the time.
Anybody younger than us, I guess. No, no. I mean, I guess I meant 18 to 26 or whatever is it's very popular among that generation. But the thing about podcasts is it's a kind of a Swiss Army knife. In other words, you can do so much with the podcast. If you're a lawyer, you can use it as a resource to promote your law practice and give information about divorce law or something like that. if you're a fan of a TV show, my son and I did a podcast just because we love the TV show The Office. So it was called That's What They Said. And that's just for pure entertainment and fun. You can use it as a substitute for educational conferences, but you can also use it for great storytelling and just do interviews, or they're the podcasts that are really produced up. Like the Breakthrough podcast produced by NPR and folks was Serial, which was a crime story. And now there are a zillion copycats of Serial, some better than others. So we say podcast, but a podcast really can mean a lot of different things. If you have a podcast, it's really, we just ask people, what do you want to get out of it? Do you just want to do it for fun, or do you want to promote your business? And then we can figure out how to make the best show we can.
So can you tell us about some examples of what you've done for businesses and how it's helped their business?
Sure. One of the ones we started with, we had a wedding consultant who called herself the Bitchless Bride. So, which sounds more rascally than it means. What she means is that you can be a bride on your wedding day and not be a bitch. So, but
we call them bridezillas, by the way.
Right. She wanted the answer to the bridezilla, the anti-bridezilla. So she did a show for 2 seasons called The Bitchless Bride. And she would interview people in her industry. So it was a success for her because not only does she produce something she's proud of, but, she could do one episode on getting the best wedding cake, and she'd bring in the cake person, and the best dress, bring in the dress person. And she'd bring in like a psychologist and a psychologist that could counsel people on how not to lose your mind on your wedding day, or a personal trainer, how to get in shape on your wedding day. So it was kind of nice because in that way, one of the nice things about podcasting is you have your own show, you invite guests on the show, and the guest gets a nice little something out of it. They get an episode. So for people in the business world who want to build relationships, even if your podcast only gets listened to by, a few dozen people, you're inviting this person on, you're saying, hey, we just did this episode. Isn't this cool? Now you can share it with your network. And then the cool thing is that person's going to say, hey, I was on Dave's podcast. Now they're bragging about that, but meanwhile, they're also promoting my show, which is super cool. So we've had that.
How do these people who go with you, do they do it? Do they make any money? Can they sell space? I mean, you got a business, you probably sell space to people. How does all that work?
We do sell sponsorship to our shows, but I'll be honest with you, it's not a huge part of our business because it's difficult to sell sponsorship time on a podcast, because most of the podcasts, especially when they first start, the listenerships is going to be in the hundreds and not the thousands. So what is that time really worth? Now, conversely, it's a great way to promote your own stuff. So there's a lawyer named Harry Margolis we do a podcast with. He's got a book called Get Your Ducks in a Row. He's an elder care lawyer or trust and estates lawyer. So it's about planning, and he's got a book. So he promotes the book on the podcast. So every time he, puts out an episode, he's got a promotion for his book. That's usually the best way to monetize a podcast, is to sell something else, use it as a promotion. That's what we recommend, because that way it's part of your marketing plan. You're not necessarily going to make money on the podcast itself, but it can be a pretty serious, meaningful weapon in elevating your personal brand, building relationships with people that you invite on the show. And I
like that word, by the way, monetize.
Cha-ching. Yeah. I'll give you another success story. I had a mediator on my show, a divorce mediator, and he came on and just talked about what he did. And then he said, Dave, you know what happened? Someone hired me in part because they heard me on your show. Well, what happened was the guy was on the show. This person was deciding whether to hire my guy, just did a Google search. The episode came up. So of course the potential client's going to listen. And when they listen to the episode, they're going to hear this guy talk about his philosophies, about what his approach in doing a mediation, what have you. And you're going to get to know that guy a lot better than just like, an ad in a newspaper or, an article on a website or something like that.
Yeah, I know Harry Margolis, and
do you?
He does quite a bit with marketing in general. He does Zoom webinars and that. I didn't realize he had a podcast. I'll have to take a look at that.
It's called Ask Harry. He was one of our first clients, and
really?
It's a great show. And like I say, he uses it the right way. So he'll invite on a financial advisor. He'll invite on an expert on trusts or something complementary to his business. So he's in a way, he's kind of doing a favor for his friends. It's almost, like a business thing. If you buy season tickets to the Celtics, remember when we used to go to basketball games in public? Anyway, but something like that, and you buy a season ticket, it's out of your pocket, but you're doing a solid for all these, you're taking business people to the game, clients and whatnot. So this is another version of that, and it's probably going to be cheaper than buying Celtics tickets. So.
I was a guest on a podcast for a financial advisor. My specialty is health insurance, particularly for retirees. And I don't know, I could probably still share this because it's really timeless. But I'm wondering if you have suggestions for the guests on the people who are hosting the podcast, things that they could be doing to get more mileage out of it. What are some of the things they do to promote it? To promote their own business.
So when you mean, as like, for example, the example you're using, like you were a guest on a show and what you can do after that, is that what you're saying? Yeah. So, most podcasts are very shareable. So it's, we always recommend try to hit, the major social media channels, Twitter, LinkedIn's a great place if you get the link to certainly one of the podcasts we produce, and most of them. You just insert the link directly into a LinkedIn post, and then say a little word. It was nice for me to be a guest on this person's show. You tag them, you put the link in there, and usually the photo will come up, and it'll be nice and easy way for people to click and hear you. So that's, and the other advice I'd give you is it's a lot easier to be a frequent guest on podcasts than you might think. If you do a quick Google search there are many matchmaking podcast guest services. So in other words, I'm on a list looking for guests. I'm also on a list offering myself up as a potential guest. And, there are pretty close to 1 million podcasts out there now, and it's a remote world. So even if there's, there may be some financial planning podcast in San Diego that just finds you and say, this person, Camille certainly knows what she's talking about. Let's have her on the show. So that sort of thing, just with a little bit of elbow grease, you can do it. And the podcasting community is pretty collegial. In other words, if you have people that you've had on your show, the law, your money, and you, who have podcasts, they'd likely be very happy to have you on their podcast. It's a very nice, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of deal.
Sure.
Fascinating. Really fascinating. Would you say that the coronavirus has enhanced your business, or it has nothing to do with it, or you were just going there anyway? Oh yeah, no, it has everything to do. Well, it has everything to do with everything we do in life has to do with the coronavirus now, doesn't it? Now, so we I'll be honest. At first, I was wondering and maybe a little concerned whether people would continue to podcast during a pandemic, but it turns out it's done more good than bad. The only clients that have kind of stopped working with us and stopped doing their show is if they, got laid off from their job or something like that, and they're just unable to pay us anymore to produce it. But there've been a lot of people who've taken this opportunity to do it. The listenership is actually up during the pandemic. I wasn't sure that was going to happen because I know so many people listen in their car, but it turns out about 50% of people listen in their home. And those people that listen at home are listening to more podcasts than they used to because they have time on their hands. Well, if somebody wanted to listen to you, how do they do it? They don't put their radio on. You say they do it through their computer or their phone? You can do it through your computer or your phone. Sure. You can, in many cases, you can do it through your smart speaker, the whatever we're calling Alexa and such, that, the Alexa has a podcast app. You can say, Alexa, open the podcast. I shouldn't say that too loud. She might hear me. I know. Before you know it, I'll be paying for something from Amazon that she takes on herself. Alexa, order Roberta and a hot tub with 8 jets. She said, I'm not sure about that. I don't know if you heard it. Okay. I did. She heard me. Somebody said something before, and she says, well, I can order that for you. Just say yes. And it'll be on your Amazon thing. And I go, forget about it. Yeah. That's why, Jeff Bezos bought an entertainment company that way. He said, Alexa, buy something, and he mistakenly bought Hulu or something. No, I don't remember what it was. It didn't really happen that way, but that would have been ironic. I thought you might like to mention, we had talked about your son and your work in autism. Sure. in order to find you, I looked up different things. Your son's quite brilliant, and they say that the autism brings out, in a way, it's a good thing. It brings out their sharpness, extra qualities. So,
For sure.
tell us
Yeah.
your last story on him.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I talk about Adrian on my show. I do a show that's runs a few times a week called the Boston Podcast. And by the way, that anyone listening who would like to be a guest on the show, and you guys should be a guest on my show as well. We'll set that up. I promise. I'm not blowing smoke. But a lot of people who are trying to keep promoting their business during the pandemic, we're offering to come on our show and talk for there's no fee attached or anything like that. Anyway, but you asked about Adrian, so thank you. So Adrian just turned 22, and yeah, he was, and so he's working a little bit, but he had a great experience at I'll give a shout out to the Cardinal Cushing School in Hanover, where he was able to stay and live there for a couple years, and just had a great experience there, and now he's with some help. He's going to be doing some work, which is good. But he's always going to need a little help. But you're right in that he gives you really amazing moments. And so the one quick story that I'll tell, I hope I didn't tell it the last time I was on your show, but he finds like humor and levity where the rest of us don't. We went to the movies once, and I kind of lost him in the crowd and got very upset, and I ended up with some of the staff searching through. It turns out he just walked into the wrong theater, and it was in the one theater that I didn't check. And so I was like almost crying, and I said, Adrian, I couldn't find you. And moments later, when we were in the right theater, he was laughing. I said, what are you laughing at, Adrian? And he said, I couldn't find you. So he's making fun of me for actually, being upset that I almost lost him. And that's kind of him in a nutshell. He's kids with autism, they can get upset when things happen, like their schedule gets rearranged or things like that. But usually the typical trappings of life, the things that we worry about, they just don't. That's why there's a theory out there that autism might be evolution. It doesn't look like it now, but maybe in the future, these people that don't get worried by the small stuff, maybe they will inherit the earth.
Hey, I like that.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. So where are you?
Sorry. Well, here's what happened. My computer, I have so many wires in the studio. I had noticed that I mistakenly kicked out the power cord to my computer. So it would have been, an unpleasant goodbye if all of a sudden I just disappeared, but we're good now.
Do you ever hear from the town people in Sharon to come back? We need you.
No, they don't. They don't need me. I mean, they
Oh, great.
and no, it was fun. It was a good job for me because it's not, it didn't involve a lot of organization and planning and frankly, it's not a huge commitment. So for those looking to break into town politics, moderator might be a good way to go, but also it kind of fit in with my ability to run meetings, to literally run a show, and just to kind of keep things moving along. Cause that I think is one thing that I'm good at. Moderator, I think, really takes just kind of patience, common sense, and things like that. Anytime I didn't know the rules, I just asked the town council, Dick Ellerman, what am I supposed to do here? And that's
in your podcast, you're moving people along too.
That's right.
They don't go over. They do that. But what else were we going to ask him? Because
I'm just curious.
So much to him.
You strike me as an entrepreneur who is successful in whatever venture he undertakes. So do you foresee maybe down the road, a few years, maybe either adding on to your business, maybe with something different, or keeping the podcast and yet doing something else? You seem to me that you could make it successful no matter what it is.
Well, that's very kind of you, Camille. I appreciate that. That's very high praise from you. And I think there's a lot more for us to do here. We are a network, but we haven't even taken advantage of a lot of the, to use a cliched word, synergy that lays right there among the shows we produce. In other words, we will take the opportunity to sometimes, run spots, or for lack of a better word, commercials for certain shows on the other shows that we produce, to kind of form those partnerships to make sure that they're guesting back and forth. And as we continue to grow and pod617.com becomes more of a destination, it'll become more and more powerful. So there's a lot to do in that regard. We are beginning to launch some new stuff. We're on the verge of launching a sort of a virtual game show that people can join, tune in. We're thinking about charging some nominal fee to participate, and that a portion of the money will go to COVID relief. But people are looking for stuff to do online. And so I've sort of been experimenting with this and doing some game shows, games, interview shows, just really kind of an hour of fun, so that for starters anyway, if there's an office out there like a law firm or an accounting firm or whatever firm who wants to do something interesting with their employees, they can hire us, and there'll be some trivia and some sort of logic games and just other fun stuff goofing around. Yeah.
But what again, so in order to watch you or any other podcast there, they have to download an app, an Apple app or any app there? And how do they get to your particular show? Do they tune in somehow? Or?
Yeah. So the app comes, if you have an iPhone, the podcast app comes with the phone. If you have an Android, I believe the Stitcher app or something just called Podcast comes with the phone. So then you can search for, the easiest way to find my show is to search for Pod617. And actually, if you search for Pod617, you'll get all the shows that we produce, and you'll see my show, the Boston Podcast. Sometimes, thank you. Yeah. Well, the Boston Podcast is a great name. The problem is it's not very searchable because search engines tend to knock out common words. And so when you're searching for a podcast, the word podcast isn't going to help. It'll just knock that out because everything's every podcast is a podcast. And then
I got one question before Camille's going to wrap up.
Okay.
Are there any new scams out because of podcasts, or they haven't come up with them yet?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess like any industry, that I do get emails like offering to all kinds of services connected to my podcast, which I think might be scams because a lot of them are in broken English, and I don't know, maybe they were written by a robot or something. But, if you're doing your own podcast, you're probably going to be mostly immune to the scams. The scams are certainly lurk everywhere on the internet, but happily they haven't really taken over the podcast world. And nobody can Zoom bomb you on a podcast because you get to edit it before you get to edit it before you publish it. So
yeah. Well, I leave it back. I tell Camille gotta wrap it up. It up.
Let me see what how the time is looking here.
Oh, I think it's just about there.
I think we're close.
I got an inner clock that tells us we have to wind up now.
We got 2 minutes left.
All right.
Really?
2 minutes left. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's do something with the 2 minutes. Except part of it is winding up. Anyway, so that's good.
Well, if you want, I can tell people where they can find out more about us, but also just in podcasting in general.
Yeah.
Is that cool?
Go for it.
Just if you're on the fence about thinking about producing a podcast, you should know it's easy to start, and you don't need to hire us to do it. We'd like you to hire us to do it, but you don't need to hire us to do it.
We have a lot about that.
There's a lot of information on our website, pod617.com, and we work with people in a lot of different ways. Our clients pay us as little as $200 a month and as much as maybe $1,500 a month.
Oh, that's nice.
This is the law, your money and you. I figured I should mention some prices of something, right? So, however, it's easy enough to buy a microphone on your own if you want to launch your podcast. You can do a lot on Zoom. There are other good online platforms out there for you to connect with guests and record those shows. It's, if you're comfortable with a computer, you can typically learn some basic editing and things like that. The microphones that you want to get typically you can get a really good one for about $80, and just go on and search for best podcast microphones. You'll find a bunch of lists and stuff. But we'd be delighted to make you part of the Boston Podcast Network family. And so check it out. And by the way, I mentioned be on my show at no charge, no strings attached. You can email me at david@pod617.com.
Great. That's a perfect time to wrap up.
All right.
We now have 19 seconds.
Oh, yeah, but don't forget they put the thing in the front and the thing in the back, and you have to put a disclaimer on afterwards, and all that takes like 35 seconds.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you very much, David. This has been very enlightening.
Camille wants
pleasure.
to
Great
squeeze every
success.
drop out of you, David, because you're really a find.
You guys are the best. I'll come back anytime.
Thank you. And for our viewers, this is very interesting. If you'd like to have more information, please let us know. Send us an email, and we'll be happy to connect you with David. And let us know if you have any other ideas for shows, because remember, this is your show, the law, your money, and you.
You. Thank you, everybody.